For 5 years, the FBI couldn't figure it out. The vault kept coming up short. Millions were disappearing. Cameras showed nothing. No break-ins, no forced entry, no outsider. Then one investigator had a thought. What if it was never an outsider? What followed was one of the most humiliating inside job exposés in American banking history, and it starts with someone who showed up to work every single day with a smile. Meet Richard. Richard was the kind of guy who remembered everyone's birthday. He brought in fresh, warm donuts from the local bakery every Friday morning without fail. If a junior teller's drawer was short $50 at the end of a highly stressful shift, Richard was the manager who would patiently sit with them for an hour after closing, quietly combing through the receipts to find the error so they wouldn't get in trouble. He was the senior vault manager at one of the largest cash processing centers in the state, handling hundreds of millions of dollars in physical currency every single week. He had been with the company for 20 years. He was an absolute institution. To his coworkers, he was family. To understand how insane this crime actually is, you have to understand the environment Richard worked in. This wasn't your standard corner retail bank branch. This was a regional cash hub, a fortress designed to move money between the Federal Reserve and local ATMs. The security protocol was entirely suffocating. Every square inch of the facility was covered by high-definition cameras. There were pressure sensors on the vault floors. Every time someone entered the main cash room, it required dual control, meaning two employees had to scan their badges, enter separate PIN codes, and physically turn keys at the exact same time just to open the heavy steel doors. It was mathematically impossible for one person to be alone with the money. It was even more impossible for them to take any of it out of the building. Employees were scanned with high-grade metal detectors and subjected to physical pat-downs by armed guards at the end of every single shift. But in 2018, something absolutely terrifying started happening. The regional hub's master ledger stopped balancing. At first, it was a relatively small discrepancy, a bundle of $20 bills here, a strapped stack of 50s there. In the massive ocean of cash flowing through the building, regional auditors initially chalked it up to an accounting error or an armored car miscount. But then the numbers started getting bigger. $100,000 vanished, then $250,000, then a full $1 million simply evaporated into thin air. The corporate executives panicked and quietly called the FBI. When federal agents arrived, they immediately suspected a highly coordinated external threat. They assumed a sophisticated hacking syndicate was manipulating the digital inventory logs to cover up physical thefts by armored car drivers. They spent months pulling GPS data from delivery trucks, auditing the digital mainframe, and interviewing drivers. They brought in polygraph examiners and aggressively interrogated the lower-level tellers. Through all of this, Richard was the FBI's greatest asset. He patiently sat in the command center, bringing the exhausted agents coffee, helping them pull complex audit logs, and shaking his head in absolute disbelief that someone in his facility could be stealing. Year after year, the theft continued right under the noses of the federal government. The FBI installed covert hidden cameras pointing directly at the vault doors, completely independent of the bank's security grid. Nothing. They rotated the security guards to prevent collusion. The money still vanished. The sheer audacity of the phantom thief was staggering. The FBI was completely humiliated. They had spent millions of dollars on a 5-year investigation, interviewed hundreds of people, and were absolutely no closer to finding the culprit. The vault was a literal black hole. Then, a forensic accountant from Washington, D.C. noticed a bizarre anomaly in the paperwork. The missing cash always originated from specific bulk transfers that occurred on Thursday afternoons. The investigator cross-referenced the employees' shift schedules for the last 5 years and looked for who was in the building on those specific Thursdays. They narrowed the list down to 30 people, then 10, then 2, and finally one single name remained perfectly aligned with every missing deposit over a half-decade period: Richard. When the FBI pitched the theory to the bank executives, they actually laughed out loud. They told the feds it was impossible. Richard was the most trusted man in the building. He didn't drive a flashy sports car. He lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. He didn't wear fancy watches or take lavish vacations. He was wearing the exact same pair of worn-out dress shoes he had been wearing since 2015. There was zero evidence of sudden wealth, but the FBI knew that numbers simply do not lie. They quietly shifted the entire weight of their surveillance operation directly onto the friendliest guy in the room. What they discovered over the next 3 weeks of targeted surveillance is an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation. manipulation. Richard didn't outsmart the advanced security system, he outsmarted human nature. Because Richard was so incredibly well-liked and deeply trusted, his coworkers had subconsciously dropped their guard around him. He weaponized his own kindness. Here is exactly how he bypassed the impenetrable dual-control vault system. When Richard and a junior employee would enter the vault to count bulk cash, Richard would constantly talk. He would ask them deep, personal questions about their kids, their weekend plans, or their stress levels. He was actively occupying their cognitive load, while the junior employee was completely distracted by a warm, engaging conversation with their mentor. Richard would slip a single thin brick of $100 bills into a specialized custom-sewn pocket inside his loose-fitting dress shirt. The entire movement took less than 1 second. But how did he get it past the metal detectors and the physical pat-downs? Richard exploited the one thing security guards are universally terrified of confronting: medical issues. Years earlier, Richard had complained of severe lower back and began wearing a bulky, thick medical back brace to work every single day. The security guards, having seen him wear it for years and liking him immensely, never asked him to remove it during the end-of-shift pat-downs. It became invisible to them. Richard was simply sliding the bricks of cash down the inside of his shirt and wedging them perfectly into the rigid lining of his back brace. He literally walked out the front door, smiling and waving goodbye to the guards, with $50,000 strapped directly to his spine. Richard's entire empire came crashing down because of one mandatory corporate policy. In the banking industry, there is a strict federal regulation requiring all employees with access to core financial systems to take at least 2 consecutive weeks of vacation every year. This rule exists specifically to catch internal fraud, because a fraudster must constantly be at work to manage their cover-up. For 5 years, Richard had managed to manipulate the HR schedule to avoid this rule. He claimed he loved his job too much to leave, offering to cover shifts for sick coworkers instead. But eventually, corporate HR forced his hand. He had to take his 2 weeks. The exact moment Richard was locked out of the building, the FBI swooped in and conducted a blind audit of his personal vault logs. The discrepancies immediately poured out. The massive paper trail he had spent years carefully massaging fell apart in less than 48 hours without him there to balance the books. The FBI secured a federal warrant and raided his modest suburban home. When they knocked on the door, Richard answered in his bathrobe. He didn't run, he didn't fight, he just sighed, looked at the heavily armed agents on his porch, and said, "I figured you guys would show up eventually." The agents tore the house apart looking for the millions he had stolen over the last half-decade. They fully expected to find offshore bank accounts, crypto ledgers, or deeds to secret luxury properties. Instead, they found something entirely different. In the dark, dusty crawl space underneath his house, stacked in neat vacuum-sealed plastic bags, was exactly $4.2 million in physical cash. He hadn't spent a single dime of it. He didn't steal the money to buy a Ferrari or a mansion. When asked why he did it, Richard told the FBI that he just liked knowing it was there. He liked the feeling of having outsmarted a multi-billion-dollar corporation that barely paid him a living wage. When the news broke, the entire bank went into a state of mourning. Junior tellers literally cried in the break room. They felt profoundly, personally betrayed by a man they viewed as a father figure. Richard was sentenced to federal prison, leaving behind a legacy as the most successful and most deceptive inside thief in modern banking history. If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button right now. The psychology behind these crimes is completely insane, and I drop brand new, mind-blowing true crime stories every single day. And if you think Richard was cunning, wait until you see what happens when a bank manager is forced to rob his own vault with a bomb strapped to his chest. Click the video on your screen right now. You do not want to miss it.